So welcome to our New Horizons small group for this, the third Sunday of April. We are in session number 8, entitled Grace, and it's Matthew chapter 20. We're using the Explore the Bible curriculum. We're looking at the second half of the book of Matthew. This is session number 8, entitled Grace, and it's Matthew chapter 20. It's not fair. She got a bigger piece. Wah! You ever heard that? If you've raised kids, you've heard it. If you've been around little kids, even big kids, you've heard it. You may even heard it in your workplace. I did all the work, but they got the credit. It's an issue in society that we all want things to be fair. We want credit for what we have done. We want to be recognized and have justice. But we've also, most of us have recognized over the years that, there are times when life is just not fair. It doesn't work out the way we think it is. We don't get what we deserve. John?
Fair is where they keep the stinking animals.
Fair is where they keep the stinking animals. Like in August and September, right? The county fair. But there are times when we really don't want justice. We really don't want things to be fair. And today in Matthew chapter 20, we're going to find out that we don't want justice. We really want grace. So if you've got your Bibles, open up to chapter 19. And I'll remind you that in the original manuscripts, they didn't have chapter headings. They didn't have verse numbers. So you don't know it so much when you look at some of our scripture references, but sometimes when they break a chapter, it's still the same story. It's the same event. And today, chapters 19 and 20 really are one episode. They're one event taking place. If you remember last week, we talked about chapter 19, starting at verse 16 and going through the end. We talked about the rich young ruler and Jesus' statement about how hard it was for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Because as a rich person, they depended on their possessions. They didn't necessarily need God. They needed their possessions. And that kind of struck his disciples as, Jesus, that's kind of a strange thing to say. Because in our society, if you are rich, if you are wealthy, it's a sign that God has favor on you. And the less wealthy you were, the poorer you were, the less God favored you. So, Jesus, if the rich can't get into heaven, what about us poor folks? How is this done? And if you remember, Jesus' comment was, what is impossible for man is not impossible for God. And today, he's continuing on that same thought. Except today, he's going to give them a parable. And it's called the parable of the vineyard workers. Now, for those of you that are coming on Wednesday nights, the parable of the vineyard workers is one of the parables in the book some of you bought. But we're not covering it on Wednesday night. We're covering it Sunday morning. So you can go back and look at that one if you want a little bit different take on what the parable is about. This morning we handed out a handout. It's two-sided. One talks about what is a parable, and the other side talks about the parables in Matthew. And Matthew and Luke are the two places where you find, I think, the most parables from Jesus. On Wednesday night, most of the parables we have done have been in the book of Luke. And we're going to do a couple in Mark and maybe one or two in Matthew, but most of them are out of Luke. I didn't do Matthew on Wednesday nights because we're doing many of these parables on Sunday morning. But the thing I want to point out to you, when it talks about what is a parable, you got to remember what the word parable means. If I was to ask you, what is a parable, what would you say?
Story.
Something that compares.
Something that compares. The general definition that a church person is going to give you is a parable is a earthly story with a heavenly meaning, which really and truly doesn't tell you everything about what a parable is. Now, Paul, what did you call it?
Well, it's two things that reference to the same.
Okay. The word parable, think of the beginning of it. Para is the same word we get parallel from. And it refers to two things being side by side. So a parable is an earthly story, something we can understand, laid side by side with an earthly meaning. But you got to be careful. You cannot many times take absolute parallelism between the two. You can't take what's in the parable earthly side and match it one to one with what's the heavenly side. But the point of the story can be matched side by side, but not always the events or the character in the story. So keep that in mind as well. On the reverse side of your sheet is a listing of the parables, or some of the parables in the book of Matthew, particularly from this point going forward. So this morning we're talking about the parable of the vineyard workers. And in this particular story, you can see some parallels that are one-to-one. For instance, when we talk about the story this morning, we're going to talk about the landowner. Well, for the Jews of that time, they would think of the Old Testament, where many times God was represented as a landowner, and specifically a vineyard owner. And the other places you can make a one-to-one comparison is that the vineyard in the Old Testament was many times a reference to the Jewish nation, Israel. So landowner, God, vineyard, Jews, that's pretty much a side by side. But when we talk about the workers, it kind of gets some disagreement between biblical scholars as to exactly what each of these workers represent. So again, I'll give you some ideas that people have put forth, and you can kind of mull it over yourself. But just remember, you can't always take a one-to-one comparison between the earth story and the heavenly story. So let's get started. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 20. We're going to look at verses 1 to 7 to start with. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 7. Oh, Dean, can you read real loud from back there so everybody can hear?
I'm going to let Carol take it.
Okay. Read loud, Carol.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon he went out and found still others standing around, and he asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard."
Okay. Verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. Okay? The landowner is, and the vineyard is Israel. Okay? So earthly story here is a landowner going out to buy or to find workers because he needs somebody to work in his vineyard. Now, for those of you not familiar with vineyards, me, I found out that when you get ready to harvest a vineyard, it's a very labor-intensive job. Far as I know of, at least back then they did not have any type of machinery to do it, but in order to harvest grapes, you have to basically go through every one of the vines and cut off the clusters individually by hand. So it takes a lot of labor. And based on the story, this landowner must have been rich because he needed lots of workers.
Had to have a big vineyard.
Had a big vineyard, yeah. So he goes out to the marketplace to find a worker. And early in the morning here means around 6 o'clock. For the Jews of this time, they divided the day up into watches. You may have remembered in other places in the Bible it talks about after such and such a watch, the first watch, second watch, so forth. Well, they would divide the day up into 3-hour watches. And the workday started at 6 in the morning and went to 6 in the evening. So the landowner goes out early in the morning at 6 o'clock in the morning to find workers. Now, think about it a minute. There are going to be lots of people standing out there morning work. So why was the landowner wanting to get out early in the morning? Any ideas?
Or gets more work out of the day.
More work out of the day? Get the best workers. Best workers for the longest time. So he's out there looking for workers. And after agreeing with the workers on 1 denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. These workers got paid the normal rate for a day laborer. So think of somebody who is basically an unskilled worker and they need something to do in order to get money to pay for their families. And 1 denarius was the wage, and it would take care of the requirements of a family for a day. Not anymore, but if you didn't get it for a day, your family may have gone hungry. So 6 o'clock in the morning, he goes out, gets the best workers, sends them into the field. They get a full 12 hours and they get the normal pay, 1 denarius. Verse 3, he went out about 9 in the morning. Say, this guy has got a big vineyard. I need more workers. We're not going to get it done. So he goes out at 9 in the morning. He saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. Now, doing nothing means without work. They were hoping to get work. They were probably not as good of workers as the one that they got at 6 o'clock, but they were good workers, and they needed the money. They needed the money to take care of their family. To these men, he said, you also go to my vineyard, and I'll give you whatever is right. So off they went. Did he promise them a wage?
No.
Nope. He simply said to them, I'll do what's right. Now, what do you think the vineyard workers, this second group, what do you think they expected to be paid? Were they expecting to get a denarius? Probably not. They were expecting to get something that was proportional. So they're going out for 3 hours less than 12, so they were going to get 75% of a denarius, whatever that would be. I don't know what the coin is. They would get something less. But they were getting something. They were getting work. They were going to be able to feed their family. Verse 5 and 7.
My Bible says a penny a day.
Penny a day. Penny refers to denarius.
Yeah.
About noon,
I guess
and at 3, he went out again and did the same thing. So every watch, he goes out and gets more workers. Now, notice, does it say anything about what he promised to pay him? Does it say anything about what he told them to do? Any conversation? No. We don't know the conversation, but his hearers, the ones in the crowd, would have assumed he had the same conversation with them he had with the first workers. He said to them, go to my fields, go to my vineyards and work, and I'll pay you what is right. Again, if they go out at noon and at 3, what are they expecting? Less than what the ones that went out at 6. Because if it went out at noon, they're only getting half a day. If they go out at 3, they're getting like 25% of a day. But again, they needed money. To support their family, they needed something. So a little something, better than nothing. Then about 5. When does the day end? 6. So we got an hour left. Then about 5, he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why have you been standing around all day doing nothing?" "Because no one hired us, sir." There's an hour left in the workday. These guys have been standing in the marketplace for 11 hours, hoping somebody's going to come and hire them. Nobody has. At this point, they're expecting to go home, and them and their family would be hungry for the night. The owner says, "You also go to my vineyard." Now, this is really the only place in the story that Jesus talks about a conversation between the landowner and the workers. But based on the first interaction with those at 6 o'clock, the people hearing him would have basically filled in all the conversations based on their culture. So as we said a minute ago, the ones that went in at 6 got a denarius. Everybody that came out at 9, at noon, at 3, at 5 would have expected to get proportionally less. But they would have gotten something. They would have gotten something to feed their family. In fact, when you look at some of these here, it really doesn't say that the landowner promised to pay them anything. He just said, "Go work." Again, the expectation was that they would get something, because even at 5 o'clock, they're desperate for something. Anything's better than nothing. 1/12 of the denarius might buy a loaf of bread, something to feed my family. So, the day is over. It's now 6 o'clock. Day is over. Verses 8 to 12. What happens next? Shirley Carey, could you read those? 8 to 12.
And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last, up to the first." And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, This last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat."
Okay. Verse 8 in the Holman. When evening came, 6 o'clock in the evening, work's over, it's time to get paid. Old Testament law required that a day laborer be paid at the end of the day. Why? They needed the money to feed their family. So if you worked as a day laborer at the end of the day, Old Testament law required you to be paid. Now, over in some of the New Testament stories in the Gospels, Jesus talks about the people who are hiring day laborers not paying them at the end of the day. But New Testament law required you pay your day laborer, because they need the money to support their family. So evening came, the owner of the vineyard told his foreman. He's got a foreman. This guy is wealthy. He's got money, because he's got somebody who's overseeing the work. He's not. He may be out there too, but he's got a boss under him that's overseeing the work. He tells him, call the workers and give them their pay. starting with the last and ending with the first. Now, this would not have struck anybody as strange. It didn't matter whether you paid the first workers first or the last workers first. The guy was the landowner. He could do what he wanted to do. So this would not have struck anybody strange. But this has a tie back to chapter 19. Look at chapter 19, verse 30. Chapter 19, verse 30. This is Jesus at the end of the story of the rich young ruler. Many who are first will be last, and the last first. Jesus is about to make a point. And part of that point is how these workers are getting paid. Verse 9. When those who were hired, about 5 came, they each received a denarius. What do you think their reaction was?
Great.
You got to be kidding me. Are you sure? I worked an hour, and at 5 to 6, sun's down, it's cooling off, it's not hot. I worked an hour and you paid me a full day's wages. I don't understand it, but thank you, thank you. What? I like you, yes. You have been really gracious to me. Now, he doesn't talk about the guys that got hired at 9, 12, and 3. He jumps from the last to the first. So when the first ones came, they assumed they would get more. But they also received a denarius.
That's what they had agreed to
It's
work.
what they had agreed to. But you paid these guys who worked an hour what you would have paid us for 12. We ought to get more. It's not fair. I didn't get justice. Not fair. They didn't say that, but, they did grumble. Verse 11, when they received it, they began to complain to the landowner. Or if you have an NIV, it says grumble. The word used here in the Old Testament is the same word that's used to talk about the Israelites in the wilderness when they grumbled about Moses and Aaron and God not getting them to the promised land when they wanted to. So mumble, mumble, mumble. This is not right. We did not get justice. What do you think you're doing? You're being unfair to us. Toddlers. These last men put in 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who bore the burden of the day and the burning heat. Equality doesn't always mean justice. And just because they got the same, you agreed to a denarius, as Shirley said. You agreed to what you were going to work for. They considered equal treatment. The landowner paid every worker the same. They thought equal treatment was really unequal treatment. It's not fair. I should have gotten more because I worked more. What's the landowner going to reply? 13 to 16. Miss Nellie, could you read 13 to 16, please?
But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Don't you agree? Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I did you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.
Okay. In the home one, verse 13 says, he replied to them, the landowner. He replied to them, friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Didn't you agree with me on a denarius? He replied to one of them. Evidently, they had a spokesman. They had somebody out of the group that started at 6, who was the spokesman, who basically came and presented their complaint to the landowner. And the landowner says, friend. Probably he didn't know the guy's name. But also, friend here, a lot of times in the Old Testament and even some places in the New Testament, when you call somebody friend, it's not necessarily a positive comment. There are other places here where the word friend is used and it really is more of a negative comment than a positive comment. So, friend, I'm doing you no wrong. I'm doing exactly what is legal. I'm doing exactly what we agreed to. We had a contract. Didn't you agree with me on a denarius? That's a rhetorical question. The answer was, yes, we agreed to work for a denarius. That was the contract. So legally, the workers did not have a leg to stand on. They got exactly what they contracted for. Verse 14, take what's yours and go. You've earned it. Take your money and leave. Notice the next statement. I want to give this last man the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want to do with my money? Morally, they also didn't have a leg to stand on because it's the landowner's land, it's his money. He can pay him whatever he wanted to. Back then, the wealthy had privilege. They could do whatever they wanted. And I want to give this last man the same as I gave you. I want to give them equal treatment. I want to give them grace, if you will. He was under no obligation to give any more than he had contracted to the first group. Everybody else, he said, I'll give you what's right. And they got more than what they expected. So the last will be first and the first last. Does that sound familiar? Go back and look at chapter 19, verse 30, and compare it to this verse. Nope, not quite the same thing. What's different about it?
But many who are first will be last,
Yeah.
and many who are last will be first.
So he has reversed the order in which he says it. So I said a minute ago that this is a parable that you can't go exactly word for word as far as a comparison. I'm trying to find my note, my fingers won't work. Everybody can agree that the landowner is God. The people hearing it then would have said, okay, this is God. We can look at it today and we can say, this is God. The vineyard was Israel. Okay, we can see that today. They would have seen it then. But what's Jesus trying to say? Who are these different workers? And here's where there's some disagreement. So here's how some biblical scholars view it. See what you think. Some biblical scholars think that Jesus is trying to make a contrast between the religious elite, think the Pharisees who were going to get to heaven because they followed the legal rules, and the tax collectors and the publicans who were just hoping for mercy. Some biblical scholars read that into it. Others think that Jesus is making a comparison between the Jewish nation and the Gentiles. That each group represents a different group. Others look at it in what this writer calls a long view, and he says Jesus is trying to warn the contemporaries of his life, so his apostles and disciples back then, not to think of themselves more highly as those of the future generations that are to come. And the last thing He's simply talking about to the apostles the idea that there are going to be others coming later that are going to come to faith because of you. You can pick any of them. The writer that I was reading last, so that's the one I remember most, said it's the latter. Jesus is simply reminding his apostles that, in the future there are going to be other people that are going to come, and they may work longer than you have. They're going to be treated the same. Here's my take on it. Me talking, here's my take on it. You got to go back to the rich young ruler. Why was the rich young ruler going away sad? He didn't want to give up all of his possessions. The Pharisees didn't want to give up their rules. They wanted to be legalistic. They wanted to get into heaven by their own merit. This story basically tells us, in my reading, that just because you worked from 6 to 6 and you did a lot of great things for the kingdom, is not why you get into heaven. Whether you worked from the time that you were born to the time that you were died, and you were 100 years old when you died, and you became a believer on your deathbed, it don't matter. Because it's not what you're doing that makes the difference. It's what God's grace has given to you. That's what gets you into heaven, not your works. Yes?
That was my take on it too.
Yeah. So mine's kind of a combination of all of the other ones, but that's my take on it. Particularly when you tie it to the rich young ruler and to the Pharisees who wanted to do everything because they abided by the legal laws. It doesn't matter when, it matters if you accept the grace. Okay, I'm done preaching for the day. Doug?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll follow up on what you said, because, let's say a child gets saved, and Jesus saves him at 12, or you get somebody that's on their deathbed, or like the man on the cross. They didn't go through any of that. I mean, they didn't follow Jesus all those years, but they still accepted him even at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they still got the same grace.
Still got the same grace. Doesn't matter if you work 1 hour or 12.
There might be rewards,
Yep.
which you just hand over to Jesus anyway. But,
Well, you go to Revelations, we lay our rewards at his feet.
right.
I don't think we're working to go to heaven for rewards.
No, not at all. I'm
Oh.
just saying you're going to give
No, I
to
know,
Jesus
there are,
anyway.
yeah, there are.
But she would have more. Let's say somebody was saved and was righteous all their life, as they could be, and then they go to heaven. Well, of course, they're going to have more rewards than somebody's on their deathbed. But of course, they are.
You go to Paul's letters and some of the other writings in the New Testament, and it's very plain that if we have truly accepted the grace of God, then we are saved to do good works to show his compassion to others.
Right.
That's the picture that shows we've actually
Well,
accepted.
everybody will have a crown of life to
Yeah.
put it.
Okay, anybody else?
Now, this kind of reminds me of something that happened to a church that we went to up on Vivian Road for a while. I don't know the name of the church, I know the name of the preacher. But he was up there, he was a little bit flamboyant anyway, and he got up there and he was talking about, tithing and stuff like that. He said, the church I came from had this little old lady would come down and sit on the front row of the seat every Sunday, and she put one nickel in the deal. And it was like belittling her, and I had all I could do not to stand up and challenge him on that her soul was not as worth as much as anybody else's soul in there. I mean, it really hit me wrong.
Yeah, she's just the widow's mite.
Well, he doesn't even go. I mean, if that preacher would have went back to the Bible, he would have seen what
The widow's mite.
talked about, where she was given out of her being poor. She was given probably more than she could, and all these people putting in this great amount of money. Well, look at them, they're doing all this. Well, you know, they're giving out of their wealth. She's giving out of her.
It doesn't come down to how much you give or what you do. It comes down to grace.
The wrong way.
Yeah. Okay, let's close and we'll find our spots upstairs. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the lesson today. Thank you for the story that shows us that it's not what we do, but it's what you do that gains us admittance into heaven. May we do good works. May we tend to others. May we be missionaries to both the physical needs as well as the spiritual needs of others. But may we realize that none of that matters. The only thing that matters is your sacrifice and our acceptance of that sacrifice. That makes us right with you and with your Father. Be with Patrick today as he brings your word. May we be back on Sunday to listen again, for we ask it in your name. Amen.